My relationship with the Alien franchise goes back more than 30 years. My earliest memories were of Aliens, the 1986 film, playing on television sometime during the early 90s, and in particular the climax where Bishop gets torn in half by the alien queen before Ripley went toe-to-toe with her whilst controlling a hulking power loader. Such images made a big enough impression on me to remain clear in my mind as age eats away at my remaining memories. I also recall seeing bits and pieces of the original Alien, as well as Alien 3, on video or television in the years that followed. But it wasn't until Alien Resurrection hit video shelves that I got to watch my first Alien film alone and in its entirety. Now, I'll be the first to admit that it was far from the best film in the franchise, but when I was 12 years of age, it served up everything I could have possibly wanted. It wasn't until I started purchasing and properly watching the other Alien films shortly thereafter that I started to fall in love with the franchise as a whole. Ironically, I started to fall out of love more and more with Alien Resurrection with every viewing of the earlier films. Everything I wanted when I was 12 went against everything the Alien franchise had been. And the day I realized that was the day I decided Alien Resurrection was a dud. I still hold a dear place in my heart for it, but that's purely down to nostalgia. I can still laugh at how it plays like a live-action cartoon. I can appreciate the efforts of the excellent cast to bring life to their poorly written characters, but I can also agree with the critics that Alien Resurrection is best forgotten. Fast forward more than 25 years after I first fell in love with the franchise, and we've seen several further installments. Some have been so terrible that they make Alien Resurrection look award-worthy. Others have been interesting, but that's really the best thing I can say about them. They have attempted to expand upon the backstory, but while I can at least say they did something different, they also failed to deliver on their potential in my opinion. Something all these films had in common with Alien Resurrection, however, were their characters, or rather, lack of characters. What I mean by that is, aside from the main protagonists/antagonists, the remainder of the characters were so lifeless and disposable, I don't even remember their names. Take the original Alien, for example, which had 7 characters, not counting the titular creature. Each one was well written with rich characterization, and even if lesser actors/actresses had been cast in these roles, the dialogue was strong enough for you to remember which character spoke which line. The sequel, Aliens, had a far larger cast of characters, but again it gave you at least 7 main characters to invest in and remember their words as well as their actions. Even the much maligned Alien 3, which all too often gets dismissed as a mindless slasher movie, gives you at least half a dozen well-written and played characters. The same cannot really be said of Alien Resurrection or any of the films which followed. Which brings me to Alien Romulus, the latest installment of the franchise, and one which gives us a cast of just 6 characters, not counting the 7th surprise character midway through. When I saw how few characters were in the script, I thought that the franchise was finally going back to its roots and was going to focus as much on making each of these characters feel integral to the story as it would no doubt serve out the expected carnage any Alien film should. Sadly, while the latter is all present and correct, there is little to no characterization to be found in this film. The cast themselves are a talented bunch, but they can only do so much with dialogue limited to genre cliches and misguided callbacks to past films of the franchise. But while it may seem that I'm about to dismiss Alien Romulus as another missed opportunity, what it delivers is simply too damn awesome to allow poor writing to ruin. Fede Alvarez, the man behind the Evil Dead remake and Don't Breathe, wastes no time whatsoever in trapping the viewer in the nightmare our 6 characters find themselves in, and we as an audience know what is awaiting them once the characters enter an abandoned Weyland-Yutani research station on a scavenging mission. And once they're introduced to the familiar antagonist some 40 minutes in, it's quite simply a non-stop express elevator to hell. Given that this film is almost 2 hours long, you have more than an hour of tense chase sequences and breathtaking set pieces, all of which taking place within the confined and soon-to-be crashing station. The pace never lets up for a second as characters are separated from each other, and in some cases their very lives. Death is dealt as suddenly and as violently as seen in the original film. And even when you see a familiar-looking pulse rifle from the first sequel in the hands of our main protagonists, it comes at the price of the xenomorph's acid blood breaching the hull, but not before it floats around the air in zero gravity. adding equal danger to the characters as they attempt to avoid certain doom once gravity is restored. This entire sequence is really the peak action set piece of the film, in the same way that the underwater sequence was in Alien Resurrection. And speaking of Alien Resurrection, there is another moment which will remind longtime fans of that film. Perhaps not in a good way, but in my opinion, Alien Romulus serves up everything Alien Resurrection should have, but failed to do. Without spoiling anything, let's just say that what you see is like nothing you've ever seen in an Alien film before. It will divide audiences, no doubt, and lead many to point fingers at Ridley Scott. But I personally think it worked perfectly. It's the first time since the original film that I've seen something I'd call the stuff of nightmares. Don't get me wrong, Aliens has its fair share of tense moments, but it's also nothing I'd call terrifying. I would absolutely apply such a word to what we see during the third act of Alien Romulus though. And it's also during this moment that the film utilizes its superb sound design to maximum effect. The sound design overall is probably the best you'll hear in 2024, and it really makes the viewer feel like they're there. The same can be said of the score by composer Benjamin Wallfisch, which is clearly influenced by that heard in Jerry Goldsmith's compositions from the original, as well as James Horner's work on Aliens. And they match the production design beautifully. It really does feel like it takes place somewhere between the first two films. The cinematography is particularly impressive in how it makes the viewer pay attention to every little detail and even catch you by surprise on repeat viewings with the little details it sheds light upon, much like the earlier films. I seem to be referencing those earlier films a lot in this review, and I knew that going in. Alien Romulus will pay more than a few homages to those films. Admittedly, it's a mixed bag with some genuinely cool ideas, but also several utterly silly ones which take you out of the movie for a moment. In that regard, it's comparable to Predators, the 2010 film, and another film which had a lot going for it in terms of how it looked, but felt the need to recreate shots and even sometimes entire scenes from the original for no good reason whatsoever. Add to that the iconic lines of the past finding their way into the script, and you are left with a film that effortlessly manages to grip you with excitement and then makes you groan with embarrassment for the cast having to deliver unnecessary fan service. And it doesn't help matters that the characters are too thinly written to care about or too annoying to root for. But thankfully, the main cast do a fine job despite working with material that's clearly beneath their capabilities. Leading lady Kaylee Spaney in particular stands out, an actress who I said was the only bright light in that lame-ass excuse for a sequel, The Craft Legacy. And while Alien Romulus could be considered as much an unnecessary sequel as The Craft Legacy was, at least this time the film is a pleasant surprise rather than the expected shit show The Craft Legacy was. Another outstanding performance comes from David Johnson, who plays the obligatory android on board. It's a very interesting performance in that it's essentially a double role, and Johnson is very convincing in both. It just makes you wish the humans were given as much attention as the android in the script. It's never a good thing, especially in a horror movie, when you start to care more about the android than you do the humans themselves. We also get a CG recreation of a character from the original film, and that is going to piss a lot of people off, and with good reason. I personally do not like CG recreations of deceased actors. I hated it in the more recent Star Wars films, and I really could have done without it in Alien Romulus, but I will say that it did not kill the film for me. I'd still prefer to see less of this sort of thing in the future, but since this is Disney we're talking about, you know that's not going to happen. Overall, Alien Romulus is a good sci-fi horror experience with some awe-inspiring set pieces which carry it above what is absent in the script. Fede Alvarez is a gifted visualist with a real mastery of tension building. I just wish he'd let someone else write for him in the future. So in closing, if you liked the Evil Dead remake and Don't Breathe, try imagining those two films combined and set in the Alien universe, because that's essentially what you get. I like it better than both of those films, to be honest. Just don't begin to pretend it's on par with the first two Alien films like a lot of people have. Don't turn this into another Prey, please. Yes, that was good, but it wasn't classic good like a lot of people are claiming. I'd give both of these films 7.5 out of 10 tops. Fans of the Alien franchise should absolutely give Alien Romulus a chance, as should those who enjoyed the excellent video games Alien Isolation and Dead Space, as this film tips its hat to both of those on more than one occasion.